We're going straight to the methods forged by the FBI hostage negotiation team.
That's right. We're going to synthesize the core principles of crisis negotiation. These are tactics that were developed through, intense hands-on learning where, quite literally, failure meant tragedy.
And then apply them to the conflicts you face every day.
Exactly. This is really a masterclass in emotional intelligence and psychological tactics. The goal here is to give you concrete tools to navigate conflict and get better outcomes, whether you're dealing with a huge contract or just, disagreement with your teenager.
Okay, so let's unpack this fundamental shift. We have to start with the origin story.
The moment of revelation.
Right. The moment the FBI basically realized the Ivy League had it all wrong. This is the story of a simulated negotiation at Harvard Law School, the global epicenter of rational negotiation theory.
It was a fascinating, almost theatrical clash of philosophies. On one side, you have FBI agent Chris Voss, who came from the trenches, right?
Right.
And on the other, two giants of academic theory, these distinguished Harvard professors, Mnookin and Bloom. And they were ready to deploy all their concepts, maximizing utility, optimizing the solution, all of it.
The scenario was designed to test nerves in theory. It was. Negotiating $1 million ransom for the agent's son.
Mm-hmm.
And the Harvard professors, totally confident in their intellectual superiority, they were operating on this purely rational economic playbook. They're ready to talk about their BTNA.
Their best alternative to a negotiated agreement.
Exactly. And to define the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement. For them, the whole thing was just a math puzzle.
The FBI agent, instead of, playing their logic game, he deployed this single, simple, psychologically calibrated question.
He just refused to be drawn into the numbers.
Totally. To every threat, every demand for the money, he just responded with variations of this one open-ended, non-committal phrase, something like, I really am sorry, but how can I get you any money right now, much less $1 million, if I don't even know he's alive?
And this is where it gets really interesting. The sources detail the professor's reaction. These incredibly smart, prepared individuals were flustered.
Visibly annoyed, even angry.
Why? Because he just refused to negotiate on their terms.
Yeah.
The entire frame of the conversation completely shifted.
Right. Instead of demanding an immediate response to their threat, which is the logical next move in a traditional negotiation, they were suddenly forced to solve his problem.
They had to figure out the logistics for him, how to prove the son was alive, how the payment would even work.
So the agent, just by asking this gentle, open-ended question that pleaded, logistical hardship, he created the illusion of being controlled. He was acting like the helpless victim asking for advice.
But in reality, he was controlling the entire conversational direction. He was forcing two of the world's leading intellectual negotiators to negotiate against themselves.
And that simple trick, which the academics probably saw as like non-intellectual, it just utterly dismantled their rational framework.
The source notes even highlight that the agent applied similar tactics in another role play and just destroyed his counterpart's budget, even though that person knew every cutting-edge trick Harvard taught.
It was a profound realization. The theory that dominated negotiation for decades was fundamentally flawed when it came face-to-face with real human emotion.
So what was the flaw? Why did 3 decades of academic theory just crumble when faced with a simple how question?
Well, the traditional theory, which really took hold in the 1980s, was built on this shaky foundation of the rational actor.
The idea that we're all just logical calculators.
Exactly. It posited that humans make decisions to maximize their own self-interest. So negotiation was treated like a rational economic analysis. You'd go in having calculated your BATNA, your alternative if the deal failed, and you'd identify the ZOPA, the overlap between your best outcome and theirs. It was just math.
But the FBI's reality was forged in this crucible of experiential learning. Their techniques weren't developed in a lab.
No, they were developed in high-risk situations where, and I'm quoting the source material here, if they didn't work, someone died. They had no choice but to ditch the idea of the cool, calculating, rational actor because they saw the messy, emotional reality of human conflict every single day.
And the intellectual validation for what the FBI was finding in the field, that emotion ruled the day. It came from the work of Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman and his partner Amos Tversky.
Right. They launched the entire field of behavioral economics by definitively proving that humans are fundamentally irrational.
Yeah.
We're driven by a series of predictable errors they called cognitive biases.
This is the psychological foundation you absolutely have to internalize if you want to be a superior negotiator. Forget the idea that people are logical. We're irrational beasts, and our emotions guide the vast majority of our decisions.
And let's look at two key concepts from Kahneman and Tversky that really underpin this whole new approach. First, the framing effect. This means people respond differently to the exact same choice depending on how you present it or frame it.
Like the classic surgery example. If a doctor frames an outcome by saying, this surgery has a 90% chance of success, the patient is way more likely to agree than if they say, there is a 10% chance of failure.
Same exact information.
Totally identical, but the emotional response is completely different. The sources also had that interesting stat about how people value moving from 90 to 100% certainty much, much more intensely than moving from, say, 45 to 55%, even though both are 10 percentage points.
Yeah, the way you present the facts changes the receiver's emotional calculus.
Okay, and the second one, which is maybe the most important bias for negotiation, is loss aversion.
Oh, absolutely. Their research proved that the pain of losing something is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
So people will act more intensely, even irrationally, to avoid a lost money, reputation, time, whatever, than they will to achieve an equal gain,
Fear of losing is a stronger engine than the desire to win.
which all boils down to that famous duality they codified. System 1 versus System 2 thinking. This really explains how irrationality works in real time.
Yeah, System 1 is our animal mind. It's fast, instinctive, automatic, and emotional. It operates below the level of conscious effort. It's like the spring that feeds the river, making these rapid judgments based on heuristics and feelings.
And System 2 is the slow, deliberate, rational, logical mind. This is the part that calculates, does complex math, analyzes data. The traditional Harvard model was all about engaging and persuading System 2.
But here's the critical relationship. System 1 guides and steers System 2. We react emotionally first, a flash of anger, a moment of distrust, a feeling of safety, and then our logical System 2 kicks in to rationalize that emotional reaction. We don't think and then feel, we feel and then we think.
And that realization is just massive for negotiation. When the FBI agent asked the Harvard professors, how am I supposed to do that? He wasn't trying to challenge their System 2 logic.
He knew they were logically superior.
Right. He was influencing their System 1, their emotional mind, by implying his situation was impossible and they were being unreasonable. Their System 1 accepted the premise that the offer was bad or difficult.
And then their System 2 immediately went to work to solve the problem by rationalizing a better offer or figuring out how to make the current one feasible.
So the FBI realized that these crisis situations are inherently emotionally driven. They are not rational bargaining.
Which forced a huge institutional pivot. They shifted their entire training emphasis away from traditional problem-solving and quid pro quo bargaining, that old economic model, and towards psychological skills, counseling, and, critically, empathy. While the Ivy League was refining the math, the FBI was mastering the application of emotional intelligence.
Okay, so the core philosophy is set. Negotiation is basically communication designed to get a result. Conflict is going to happen, but engaging with it in a psychologically aware way, targeting System 1 first, is the only path to superior outcomes.
Absolutely. It's less about winning an argument and more about shaping the emotional landscape, and that landscape starts with how you present yourself.
Now that we've established that you have to treat the person across the table as an emotional being first, we can move into the foundational, actionable tools the FBI developed to influence that emotional mind. And the first one, the simplest yet maybe the most powerful lever you have, is your voice.
It sounds so obvious, but tone is often overlooked. Your voice tone accounts for, 38% of a message's impact? It's second only to body language.
So you can intentionally use your voice to reach into someone's brain and literally flip an emotional switch from distrusting to trusting, from nervous to calm, or from aggressive to collaborative.
The sources outline 3 basic tones, and let's just immediately disqualify the third one, the direct assertive voice. This tone, sharp volume, commanding statements, it signals dominance and it instantly triggers pushback.
It's a relic. Avoid it.
Totally. Unless you're in some rare, life-threatening situation where you need immediate compliance, this tone just closes down collaboration.
So what are the 2 to master?
They're based on the feeling you want to create. First, the crisis management tone, the late-night FM DJ voice. This is calm, deep, and crucially slow, using downward inflecting statements. This tone signals control, confidence, and, above all, safety.
Okay, I have to pause there. If I'm in a high-stakes meeting, say, negotiating a complex contract, and I adopt this low, slow, downward inflecting voice,
Hmm.
how do I stop that from sounding completely artificial or, worse, kind of condescending?
That's a great question, and it really speaks to the need for practice. The key is intent. The DJ voice is all about reducing the emotional heat in the room. In a crisis like that 6-hour Harlem fugitive standoff where this was deployed, the slowness itself communicates that the negotiator is completely in control and unhurried, even with all the danger.
And in a business context.
In a business context, it forces you, the speaker, to slow down your own System 2 thinking, which prevents you from making rash statements, and that in turn calms your counterpart. It's about projecting patience. If it sounds artificial, it probably means you're trying to fake the calm instead of actually generating it internally.
That makes sense. It's an internal state projected outward. So if the DJ voice signals control in a crisis, what's the other preferred tone?
That's the positive, playful voice. This is the one you should be using, like 90% of the time. It's light, easygoing, and non-threatening. It communicates, I'm okay, you're okay, we're just figuring this out together. The sources stress that this tone should always be paired with a slight smile, which releases feel-good neurotransmitters in both your brain and theirs.
Okay, moving beyond tone, we get to the first core linguistic tool, mirroring. This technique
Yeah.
it's astonishingly simple and yet profoundly effective. It's almost like neurological telepathy.
Mirroring is defined as repeating the last 3 words, or the critical 1 to 3 words that your counterpart has just said. That's it. If they say, we can't afford to launch the product by Tuesday, you just repeat, launch the product by Tuesday.
And we are neurologically wired to be drawn to similarity and deeply suspicious of what's different.
Exactly. Mirroring leverages that fundamental human tendency. It insinuates similarity and instantly facilitates bonding. But the main function is tactical. It encourages the other side to keep talking, to reveal their underlying desires, their strategy, their critical information, all without you having to ask a demanding question.
Let's look at that corporate anecdote from the sources. A student was dealing with a boss who vaguely asked for a second copy of a file. The student asked where to put it, and the boss just said, anywhere.
Now, a traditional negotiator would have probably tried to nail down the specifics, right? Do you mean in the shared drive or on the server?
But the student, recognizing that vagueness was a clue, just used mirroring. Anywhere.
And that gentle, calm, concerned mirror forced the boss into this awkward long pause. That pause is crucial because the boss's System 2 was forced to process. Why is he questioning anywhere? The repetition suggested that anywhere wasn't good enough.
And when the boss finally spoke, he exposed his true underlying need. He admitted he needed 2 digital backups because his computer was out of file space, and he was planning to have a new, inexperienced assistant print the physical copy later.
Wow. So the mirror exposed 2 critical unknown unknowns? A technical constraint, the lack of file space, and a personnel issue, the new assistant.
All without a single aggressive, logical question. It's just information gathering disguised as curiosity.
Precisely. And if mirroring is the information trigger, the next foundational tool is labeling, which is the mechanism for executing tactical empathy.
Tactical empathy is a fantastic phrase. How does the FBI define that specifically?
It's recognizing a counterpart's perspective and then vocalizing that recognition. It is a deliberate, active commitment to understanding their world, their motivations, their pain points. It's not sympathy. You don't have to agree with them.
But you have to show you get it.
Exactly. You have to show that you comprehend their reality.
And labeling is the verbal execution of that. You're giving someone's emotion a name, using these tentative phrases like, it seems like, it sounds like, or it looks like.
And that tentative nature is key because it invites correction, which is a whole other tool, but it always validates their emotion and acts as a shortcut to intimacy and trust.
Look at the Harlem standoff again. 3 fugitives are trapped. The FBI knew they couldn't just rush in. For 6 straight hours, agents rotated shifts, repeating the same labels, just verbalizing the fugitive's emotional state.
It looks like you don't want to come out. It seems like you worry that if you open the door, we'll come in with guns blazing. It looks like you don't want to go back to jail.
They weren't making demands. They weren't trying to reason with them. They were just verbalizing their predictable internal fears.
Just validating the emotion until the fugitives, finally feeling truly heard and understood, subtly signaled they were ready to engage.
It's profound. It's subduing the enemy without fighting, by neutralizing their emotional defenses first. When you name the negative emotion, it instantly loses its power.
And when you name a positive one, you reinforce it.
This helps us distinguish between what we see on the surface and what's actually driving it. The presenting behavior versus the underlying feeling. The actions are just signals. The real motivation is hidden.
The Girl Scout fundraiser story is the perfect corporate parallel. A fundraiser was trying to get a big gift from a wealthy donor who was hyper-focused on these strict, specific criteria. Only this type of project, only this duration, only this recipient. She kept rejecting proposals because they didn't meet her hyper-rational criteria.
And the fundraiser initially tried a label based on that presenting behavior. It seems like you were worried about the administrative overhead and so on.
And that just confirmed the donor's fear, but it didn't solve the problem. She just reiterated her criteria.
So the breakthrough came when the fundraiser ignored the criteria, the presenting behavior, and reached for the underlying feeling. She paused, thought about the donor's history with the organization, and offered a second label.
It seems that you are really passionate about this gift and want to find the right project, reflecting the opportunities and life-changing memories the Girl Scouts gave you when you were young.
And that was the key. With that one deeply empathetic label, the donor's face just changed, and she signed a check without even picking a specific project. She just said, "You understand me."
Her motivation wasn't the strict criteria. It was about honoring this deep personal memory. Once she felt understood on that profound emotional level, the criteria, all the System 2 rationalizations, they just melted away.
Building on that power of labeling the negative, we get to the most counterintuitive and frankly terrifying tool for most people, the accusation audit.
It sounds absolutely terrifying, doesn't it?
It does. It's defined as listing every negative charge your counterpart could level against you and voicing them preemptively at the start of the negotiation. I mean, isn't leading with all your flaws or perceived injustices just going to make you sound completely weak and insecure? Doesn't that invite them to take advantage of you?
That's the System 2 fear talking. Logically, it sounds like suicide, but psychologically, it's pure judo.
How so?
The purpose is powerful and has multiple layers. First, it diffuses negativity instantly. You take the wind right out of their sails because they realize you've done your homework and you're empathetic. They can't attack you with those known grievances because you've already acknowledged them.
So you're neutralizing the emotional ammunition before they can even fire it.
Exactly. Second, it establishes a safe zone of transparency. Third, and most importantly, it leverages the human tendency to be agreeable and to contradict negative expectations. When you list all these negative accusations, the counterpart often feels compelled to deny them, to say, no, it's not that bad.
And that immediately shifts the dynamic toward common ground.
Let's unpack that Anna ABC Corp case study because it shows how this technique can turn a hostile situation into a collaboration. Anna was negotiating a $1 million contract cut with a smaller, already resentful partner, ABC Corp. The relationship was poisoned.
And now, Anna's firm needed ABC to take even more pay cuts because of demands from a new, larger client.
They knew they were walking into a fight. So Anna and her partner listed the most painful accusations ABC Corp could possibly level. You are the typical big prime contractor trying to force out the small guy. You reneged on your promise. You're only doing this because your team messed up the budget. They rehearsed these until they sounded natural and slow, using that late-night FM DJ voice.
So Anna opens the meeting, not with logic, but with the audit. She says, "You may feel like we have treated you unfairly and that we changed the deal significantly since we started. We acknowledge that you believe you were promised this work. You probably think we were just trying to push you out now."
This created silence, followed by an emphatic nod. By owning those negative feelings, she created the space for her partner, Mark, to explain the facts, that the new client demands turned their firm's profits into massive losses, justifying the cut, and that they genuinely valued ABC's work.
But the emotional truth is always unpredictable. When Mark finished explaining, one of the ABC reps just gasped in frustration.
And Anna immediately used a label on that reaction, referring back to the audit. It sounds like you still think we are the big, bad prime contractor trying to push out the small business.
That was the moment of psychological judo. The rep's conditioned response, thanks to Anna's preemptive honesty, was denial. He said, no, we don't think that. We know you're in a tough spot.
And that denial was the opening. It softened the System 1 hostility, allowing their System 2 to start rationalizing a solution.
And by combining the audit with labels and calibrated questions, Anna pushed the rep to admit that, given the situation, cutting the worker count was the only logical solution.
They got the pay cut, secured $1 million in profit for their firm, and the reps still concluded the meeting by saying, We appreciate the fact that you are acknowledging what happened, and we don't feel like you are mistreating us. The accusation audit neutralized the hostility and secured the outcome.
When you look at all those foundational tools, voice tone, mirroring, labeling, the accusation audit, you realize they're all built around gathering information and creating emotional safety.
Which brings us to the FBI's approach to the single most feared word in negotiation: no.
For most of us, no feels like rejection, failure, or at least a hostile roadblock. We're trained socially and professionally to push for yes at all costs.
But for the FBI, this is profoundly backward. No is pure gold. It's an affirmation of autonomy and control for the person speaking it. When you allow someone to say no, you make them feel safe, secure, and comfortable. You give them back their control.
And once they feel in control, they can start collaborating.
Right. If you push too hard for a quick, superficial yes, you trap your counterpart. This results in meaningless defensive answers, or worse, a false sense of agreement. No, on the other hand, opens the path forward because it forces the real issues to the surface. It slows everything down.
And it allows the speaker to articulate what they do want.
This requires us to be hyper-aware of the nature of agreement. We have to recognize the three types of yes, because they all sound the same but have vastly different values. First, there's the counterfeit yes. This is where the counterpart plans to say no but feels yes is an easier escape route.
Or they're just trying to gather more info and politely end the conversation.
Then there's the ubiquitous confirmation, yes. This is a simple reflexive affirmation to a black or white question with zero promise of action. Do you agree this is the best path forward? Yes. It's just polite noise.
And finally, the goal. The commitment. Yes, this is the true agreement that leads to action, the signature on the contract, the actual change in behavior. This is the only one that matters.
And the danger of mistaking a counterfeit yes for a commitment is perfectly illustrated by your own early experience volunteering at that crisis hotline.
Oh, that was a defining moment. I was talking to a regular caller named Daryl, a cab driver with severe agoraphobia, and I was so proud of my new logical training. I used argument after argument to lead him to admit he had nothing rational to fear about stepping outside.
And at the end, he logically conceded every single point. So what was his response to your brilliant logic?
He said, "Thank you, Chris. Thanks for doing such a great job." I was beaming, thinking I had achieved the commitment. Yes, until my supervisor, Jim, told me it was one of the worst calls he had ever monitored.
Why was it so terrible?
Jim explained that Daryl was congratulating me, the negotiator, for doing a great job, not himself for owning the solution. Daryl's yes was a classic counterfeit. He wanted me to feel good so I would hang up and leave him alone.
The whole conversation was about the negotiator's ego, your need to be right, not the caller owning the necessary action.
Exactly. You need the other party to feel solely responsible for creating the new ideas. If you logically convince them into a corner, they will flee with a hollow yes.
So the solution is to invite the very word we instinctively fear, no. How do we tactically force that no to get information?
One of the most effective ways is to ask ridiculous, obviously wrong questions that can only be answered negatively. For example, in a stalled meeting, asking a partner, "It seems like you want this project to fail," forces them to snap to attention and immediately correct that false assumption.
So you're forcing them to state their true goal by denying the negative one.
Right. And similarly, you can gain deep information by intentionally mislabeling a counterpart's emotion or desire. You say something you know is demonstrably wrong, but it's close enough to their truth to trigger a response.
For example, if someone is intensely frustrated about a new company policy, you might mislabel their emotion by saying, "So it seems that you really are eager to leave your job because of this policy."
That sounds like it could backfire if they think you're being manipulative.
The key is the tone, calm, exploratory, using "it seems like." The person is forced to stop, listen intently, and correct you. They won't just say no. They'll say, "No, that's not it at all. I'm actually really invested in my job, but this specific policy makes me feel disrespected because of X, Y, and Z."
And that correction provides invaluable, often hidden information that a direct question could never get. You force them to clarify the actual constraint.
And once you've built that trust and successfully navigated through the no's and the counterfeit yeses, and you think you have a genuine commitment, yes, you can't just stop there. You need verification.
And that's where the rule of three comes in to harden the agreement.
The rule of three is a simple, systematic way to ensure buy-in. You get the other party to agree to the same thing 3 times in the same conversation, but you use varied tactics.
So the first agreement is the initial commitment.
Yep.
Yes, one, usually after all the labeling and mirroring.
The second agreement, yes to, is obtained by using a summary of their position, or a label, which prompts them to respond with, "That's right." Getting the response, "That's right," is way more powerful than yes, because it signifies ownership and deep alignment.
And the third agreement, yes, 3, should be a calibrated how or what question about implementation. Something like, what do we do if we get off track next week? Or how will we make sure all the necessary stakeholders approve this by Friday?
That triplet confirms true buy-in, hardens the commitment, and is incredibly difficult for someone to fake. It exposes lies or deep resistance early on before the real work begins.
That process brings us seamlessly to the single most effective tool in the FBI's playbook: calibrated questions. We touched on them at the start with the Harvard anecdote, but now let's look at their strategic value in gaining control, which ironically means giving the counterpart the illusion of control.
Calibrated questions are open-ended queries, starting almost exclusively with the non-aggressive words how and what. They are designed to remove any trace of aggressive demand from the conversation. They nudge rather than shove the other person toward a solution.
And the true genius is the psychology. These questions force the counterpart to pause, think about your constraints, and solve your problem. And because they're the ones supplying the answer, they're verbally articulating the solution. They feel like they're in control.
But you, the negotiator, are entirely framing the scope of the problem and the path to the resolution.
And the most essential calibrated question, the ultimate graceful denial, the one that says no without using the word, is, how am I supposed to do that?
Or, in a financial context, how can we raise that much?
The power of that phrase is that it achieves what they call forced empathy. It compels the other side to stop focusing on their own demands and to take a good, hard look at your situation and your constraints. It forces their system, too, to rationalize a solution that accommodates your reality.
This tactic was used masterfully during the kidnapping of Jose in Ecuador. The kidnappers immediately demanded an exorbitant $5 million ransom.
And Jose's wife, Julie, was coached by the FBI team not to argue the price, not to make a counteroffer, but to answer every single demand with a calibrated question. Specifically, how can we raise that much, and how can we possibly pay you anything until we know Jose is okay?
This created operational chaos for the kidnappers. The immediate negotiator had to walk back into the jungle and coordinate with his internal team every single time Julie asked a how question. He couldn't just give an answer. He was forced to solve her logistical problems.
And this created constant delays. The questions stalled the process, forced the kidnappers into internal coordination, and drove the ransom demand from $5 million down to $3 million, then $1 million, all the way down to $16,500.
But the strategy worked not just by lowering the price. The constant delays and the internal coordination issues caused frustration within the guerrilla group. Some of them, sick of the stalling, just peeled off, leaving Jose guarded by only one inexperienced teenager.
Which created the exact conditions for Jose's eventual escape during a rainstorm. The negotiating strategy succeeded by creating the conditions for success through delay and information gathering.
This deep, information-obsessed approach to negotiation relies heavily on discovering what the FBI calls black swans, the unknown unknowns.
Black swans are those pieces of hidden or unexpected information that, if you unearth them, would fundamentally change the entire dynamic of the negotiation. There are the things you don't even know you should be looking for.
Right. They're contrasted with the known knowns, the facts on the table, and the known unknowns, like a competitor's hidden deadline.
The history of negotiation is full of tragic failures where knowns were prioritized over the unknown. The most sobering example is the 1981 Rochester Bank standoff with William Griffin. The authorities at the time were operating entirely on old, established templates.
The known knowns, which dictated that bank robbers always talk, always have monetary demands, and always want an escape route.
And the authorities missed 3 crucial black swans because they filtered all incoming data through the lens of a failed bank robbery. First, Griffin hung up the phone repeatedly, which was unprecedented. Hostage takers always talk. They just dismissed it as an aberration.
Second, authorities found out Griffin had already committed a double homicide blocks away before he even entered the bank. This was a massive clue, showing he was capable of killing without monetary demands, yet they clung to the idea that he just wanted money.
And third, in a rambling note he forced a hostage to read, he included the line, "After the police take my life." But because they were so focused on the standard robbery gone wrong template, they missed this undeniable clue.
They treated that line as just part of a rambling manifesto rather than the key to the whole situation.
The black swan was that Griffin wanted suicide by cop, and his goal was to execute a hostage at the 3 p.m. deadline. By not retaining a beginner's mind, by trying to fit this complex reality into a simple old template, the authorities were shackled by their expectations.
So when information came in that didn't make sense, the hang-ups, the prior homicides, his desire for his own death, they just dismissed it as, he's crazy.
Which is the ultimate mistake. The goal is always to treat their crazy, not as a dismissal, but as a clue. If someone's actions don't align with your rational model, it means you are missing a piece of information that makes them perfectly rational in their own universe.
And the failure to seek that missing piece led directly to the tragic death of Margaret Moore.
Once you uncover a black swan, it becomes a leverage multiplier. Leverage, in this context, is anything that allows you to change your counterpart's needs or expectations. The sources detail 3 types.
First, positive leverage. This is the simplest. You have something they want and they know it. For instance, an investor desperately wants to buy your firm because of its proprietary technology. That's positive leverage.
Second is negative leverage. This is the ability to make them suffer, or rather, to inflict pain, usually by damaging their reputation or status or exposing a weakness. This is immensely powerful because of loss aversion.
Right, since the fear of losing status is psychologically twice as strong as the desire to gain status, effective negotiators look for clues about who their counterpart's audience is and what status they fear losing most.
The ethical application of that is complex. But in business, it often just means knowing a hidden deadline that, if missed, would cause the other CEO to lose face with their board. You don't threaten them, you just frame the timeline in a way that respects their hidden constraint.
Third, and often the most elegant, is normative leverage, or knowing their religion. This involves using their own standards, their beliefs, their company policy, or their worldview to advance your position. You show them profound respect by framing your demands within their own roles.
Because they view their religion, whether it's literal faith, market rules, or corporate procedure, as an authority greater than themselves.
This was the strategy deployed during the Washington, D.C. farmer-terrorist standoff with Watson, a man prepared to die for his intense religious and political beliefs. The negotiation team realized his strong religious conviction was the ultimate black swan.
Arguing about politics or legality was pointless. They had to use normative leverage. The team, after a lot of deliberation and information gathering, used a powerful, resonant, normative reference.
The phrase, dawn of the third day.
And there was immediate silence on the other end of the line. By positioning his surrender as an honorable, face-saving move within the context of his religious worldview, a reference to resurrection, to coming back into the light after a sacrifice, they used his internal authority against the situation itself.
Watson agreed to come out and surrender peacefully. It was a victory achieved not by confrontation or economic logic, but by a deep respect for his most deeply held beliefs.
We've moved from psychological theory to actionable tools, and now we have to get to the final arena of conflict, the actual exchange of value, whether that's money, resources, or time. And we have to start with the most dangerous word in negotiation: fair.
Fair is an incredibly powerful emotional term, and it's a minefield. It's often used as a defensive accusation, implicitly charging the other side with unfairness. This emotional destabilization instantly triggers subconscious feelings of discomfort and defensiveness in the listener,
Which leads to irrational, quick concessions just to make the uncomfortable feeling go away.
We see this with the Robin Williams example in Disney's Aladdin. He agreed to a specific contract for a cut-rate fee, but only went ballistic, a massive System 1 reaction, when the film became a blockbuster and he felt cheated. He wasn't truly angry about the money he lost, he was angry about the perceived unfairness after the fact.
People will sustain great costs just to reject perceived unfairness.
There are 3 main ways people use the F word, and you have to have a systematic, practiced response for each one. The most common is the defensive accusation, often delivered with a slight whine. We just want what's fair.
And your best response, which seems counterintuitive, is to immediately take ownership of the perceived failure, completely disarming the accusation. Use gentle DJ voice and say, "Okay, I apologize. Let's stop everything right now and go back to the exact point where I started treating you unfairly, and we'll fix it."
This does 2 things. First, it satisfies their need for validation, neutralizing the emotional attack. Second, it forces them to articulate the specific grievance. They can no longer hide behind the generalized fairness accusation. They have to tell you their actual problem.
which often reveals a black swan. The second use is manipulative, often as a closing jab. We've given you a fair offer, why are you resisting? This tries to shift the moral high ground to their side.
The best counter is twofold. First, you mirror the word fair, and then you pause, letting the word hang in the air. Second, follow up immediately with a label. It seems like you're ready to provide the evidence that supports that specific evaluation.
Which demands hard data, declaws the emotional attack, and forces them back into a rational System 2 discussion.
The third, and only positive use, is preemptive. You use the word early on to set yourself up as an honest dealer, controlling the frame.
You lead with,
Aw.
I want you to feel like you are being treated fairly at all times. So please, stop me at any point if you feel I'm being unfair, and we will immediately address it. You turn their potential weapon into a collaborative tool that you control.
Next, we have to debunk one of the most ingrained concepts in traditional negotiation: compromise. The source material is brutally direct about this. Compromise is dangerous.
We compromise because it's easy, it's fast, and it saves face for both parties. But it is driven by fear, the fear of conflict, the fear of losing the deal, not by actual goals.
The shoe analogy is brilliant and has to be repeated. Splitting the difference often leads to the worst possible outcome. It's like the husband and wife who compromise on footwear when they only have black and brown shoes. The compromise is that the husband ends up wearing one black shoe and one brown shoe.
Either black or brown would have been better than the fear-driven compromise. The philosophy here is clear. No deal is better than a bad deal, and compromise often generates the worst possible result.
We need a similar skepticism about deadlines. Deadlines are the bogeymen of negotiation. They're often arbitrary, self-inflicted, or just based on internal procedures. But the perceived consequences of missing them, loss aversion at work, pressure negotiators into bad deals.
A good negotiator resists the urge to rush and instead leverages the counterpart's deadline. The example of the Haitian kidnappings in the 90s demonstrates this perfectly. The FBI learned, through careful listening, that the kidnappers had a specific non-monetary constraint.
They realized the kidnappers, who were often young and unstructured, wanted to get paid by Thursday or Friday so they could party through the weekend. That was their true deadline. It wasn't about maximizing the final dollar amount. It was about maximizing the weekend party time.
Once the FBI negotiators realized this self-imposed cultural constraint was the real black swan, a form of leverage, they stalled negotiations until late in the week, sometimes even Friday afternoon.
And by stalling, they cut the best deals and got much lower ransoms. Why? Because the criminals' negative leverage diminished rapidly as the weekend approached. They needed any cash now to meet their emotional need for party money, rather than waiting until Monday to maximize the haul.
They leveraged the counterpart's fear of missing their own deadline against them.
Finally, let's address the inevitable. What happens when all the psychological judo fails and you are forced into traditional offer-counter-offer haggling? You need a reliable, systematic approach to prevent the compromise trap.
The Ackerman bargaining model.
The Ackerman model is a brilliant four-step system designed specifically to prevent that predictable 50-50 result of meeting in the middle.
Yeah.
It leverages the anchor effect and the psychological perception of pain.
Step 1. Set your non-negotiable target price. Your goal. You never move beyond this.
Step 2. Set your first offer at an extreme anchor, specifically 65% of your target price. This shock immediately limits the counterpart's cognitive abilities and focuses them entirely on your anchor, pulling the ZOPA dramatically in your direction.
Step 3. Calculate 3 decreasing increments for your raises. This is critical. You calculate the jump from 65 to 85%, then a smaller jump from 85 to 95, and finally the smallest jump from 95 to 100% of your target. You have to pre-plan these concessions.
The psychological effect of decreasing increments is immense. It provides the illusion that you're struggling, that you are being squeezed, and that you are approaching your absolute limit. The counterpart feels like they're winning because your pain, your concessions are diminishing. They feel like they are squeezing the last drops out of you.
And step 4. Use empathy, mirroring, and how questions relentlessly to make the other side counter before you increase your offer. The key is to drag out those small, pre-calculated increases, making every single one feel like pulling a tooth. You use the phrase, "How am I supposed to offer that?" to deny their request, forcing them to increase their offer instead.
And 2 critical tactical elements reinforce this model. First, always use non-round numbers. Instead of offering $40,000, offer $37,263. Instead of $5,000 for a ransom, offer the infamous $4,751.
Why does that matter? It makes the offer feel serious, calculated, and immovable. A round number, like 5,000, feels like a temporary placeholder. A precise number feels like it was arrived at through rigorous internal calculations. It just exploits a psychological quirk that makes the offer seem final and definitive.
Second, always be ready to pivot to non-monetary terms. When the haggling stalls on price, when you're stuck between 85 and 95%, introduce items that are valuable to the counterpart but cheap or free to you.
Right. In a salary negotiation, you can't increase the cash offer, but you can offer flex time, a better title, or remote work. The sources highlight a consulting firm that offered a magazine cover stories zero cost to them, but priceless advertising and status for the consultant in exchange for a deep discount on a training fee.
That pivot allows both sides to feel like they gained something without breaking the budget. And finally, when facing an extreme anchor from the other side, the ability to take the punch is vital. Don't fold. Deflect it immediately with a calibrated question like, how am I supposed to accept that offer? Or pivot away from the number entirely. Let's put price off to the side for a moment and talk about what would make this a good deal.
So we've synthesized the core principles of the FBI's high-stakes negotiation playbook, moving from that philosophical split at Harvard all the way through the Ackerman bargaining model. What we've learned is that negotiation is communication with results, and you absolutely get what you ask for, but only if you ask correctly and with genuine curiosity.
The core institutional shift is moving from a rational battle of arguments, where you try to impose your will and your logic, to an information-obsessed, empathetic process of discovery. We're not trying to win the argument, you're trying to understand the other person's reality so completely that they convince themselves that your solution is actually their idea.
The adversary is always the unsolved situation, never the person across the table.
Exactly.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to carry forward. We are all inherently neurologically afraid of conflict because it risks personal attack and, deep down, expulsion from the tribe. We avoid conflict constantly in our jobs, with our families, and our finances in favor of easy yeses and detrimental compromises, like wearing one brown shoe and one black shoe.
However, genuine, honest conflict, the kind engaged with empathy, curiosity, and a focus on uncovering hidden truths, is the only path to truth, creativity, and ultimate collaboration. We'd ask you to look at your life right now. What conflict are you currently avoiding? What unsolved situation requires you to calmly and empathetically engage with it, using a label, using a mirror, or asking that critical how question to find a solution?
You have to ignore that little system one voice telling you to run, because that adversarial moment, when engaged correctly, is where the best outcomes live.